Hello, everyone, again, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining our Caregiving Journey webinar focused on coping with dementia. I'm Hillary Ebach, Chief Operating Officer of Carello, and I'm thrilled to host a discussion with my Carello colleagues, Jennifer Piscatello and Perry Mims. And for those of you who don't know Carello, we provide support to family caregivers to help them. We provide guidance and support on a host of caregiving issues to help them collaborate with others, be more informed and confident in their caregiving decisions, and just to make caregiving easier. Jennifer and Perry are part of our team of caregiving experts. We also have a set of digital tools that provides information, tools, and resources across a whole range of caregiving topics. Again, just to make caring for our loved ones easier. In addition to being part of our care advocate team, Jennifer and Perry are both certified dementia practitioners, which means that they have specialized knowledge in Alzheimer's and dementia care. Now, I'll start out by acknowledging that dementia is a huge topic. We're certainly not going to cover all aspects, nor would we ever try to cover all aspects of dementia in one webinar. So today we're going to be focusing on caregiver challenges and providing some tips and strategies about coping with dementia. I'm going to be peppering Perry and Jennifer with questions over the next 30 minutes. And I really encourage everyone to submit your own questions in the question box. And if you have a thought to weigh in on via the chat box, by all means, feel free to do so. We'll try to address everybody's questions. And if for some reason we're not able to do so, we'll follow up with each of you individually. As mentioned, dementia is a big topic. There are many types of dementia, many types of challenges along the way for those caring with dementia. And although every caregiving journey is unique, we're going to try to provide some tips and strategies that are useful for all of you caregivers, no matter where you are exactly in your journey of caring for a loved one with dementia. To get us started, we thought it would be helpful to get a sense of all of your situations, sort of where you are in your journey. So I'm going to launch a poll and let us know sort of where you are. Are you just starting to see memory loss in your loved one? Do you have a recent dementia diagnosis? Are you a long-time dementia caregiver, or just trying to get smart on the topic? Give us a sense of where you are, and give you a couple more seconds. And it looks like many of you are just in the early stages, starting to see some memory loss or planning for the future. So that's great. Thank you for level setting us. And I'm sure some of the things we're talking about are going to be really useful as you start that journey, or just try to get smart. So I'm going to turn my first question to Jen. As a care advocate and certified dementia practitioner with many years of experience educating and coaching families, so where do we start here? Is there a common theme that cuts across all types of dementia and phases in the caregiving experience?
Sure. What comes to mind initially, really, and is probably the one thing that I cover in almost every call I have with a caregiver that's in a role caring for somebody with some type of dementia, is really helping them understand the dementia brain, and the concept that a dementia brain is separate from the person that they knew and the brain that they had before they were diagnosed with dementia, before dementia took hold. So many times the dementia brain has almost got its own personality and its own sort of existence, so to speak. So a lot of times people confuse when they're dealing with their loved one pre-dementia, or they're dealing with the dementia brain that their loved one now has. And so understanding that concept and being able to separate those two things is really really important, because in doing so, you'll realize you can't change it, you can't reason with it, you can't argue with it. It is, one of those challenges that so many people run into, like, I can't get my mom to blank. Well, it's because you're dealing with the dementia brain, not with your mom anymore. So separating the person that you know and love from the disease and the condition that they have is especially important and super helpful as it relates to so many various things. But trying to go along with the situation when appropriate is best, rather than trying to, again, argue with it, change it, reason with it. Determining where your loved one is stuck can be extremely helpful too. So paying attention to what they're actually saying might give you a clue that they're not 70 anymore. They think they're 20 because they're, trying to catch the train that they used to get to their, job back in their 20s. And that can be kind of a cool thing too, because you might learn more about what life was like in their 20s, because those memories are very vivid at that moment. So again, trying to identify what timeline they're stuck in, or what period of their life they're stuck in, might explain why they don't know who you are, because in their 20s, they didn't have a child. So that can also explain why maybe they're calling you somebody else that maybe you resemble, or a role that you're playing that was familiar to them back then. So, just trying to validate how they feel, and, again, put yourself in their shoes and realize the dementia brain is separate from who you knew and loved as a person. And that's really kind of one of the main sort of themes that I tend to, in some aspect, cover when I'm talking with folks in a caregiving role for somebody with dementia.
Yeah, and that point about not being able to reason with or argue with sort of the dementia brain calls to mind the many communication challenges that many caregivers have when dealing with someone with memory loss. And I know the two of you coach families on this issue, give them communication tips and strategies all the time. Perry, can you share some of the tips that you usually provide to families?
Sure. So I guess to start with some basic do's and don'ts of communicating with somebody who has dementia is to remember that communication is more than just words. So how you are communicating, such as making eye contact with the person, being on the same level, whether that's sitting next to them or standing with them, not speaking from behind someone where they can't see you or with your back turned to them, so that they can tell where the sound and the voice and who's addressing them. Also, speaking slow and low in tone can be very useful. The tone of voice can have a big effect as far as being calming. And by doing that, the message that you are also returning to that person can seem calming as well. Touch is a great tool. So holding hands with the person that you're speaking with to let them know that you are there to help. It can also be super engaging to remind them that you're there, um, as well as trying to stay in the moment, meeting the person where they are, kind of to what Jen was just talking about. Finding common information or things to speak about is very helpful. Resisting oversharing or asking complicated questions. Both can be very overwhelming for your loved one if they're suffering from dementia. This can be really hard with, for example, a mother-daughter relationship. You may want to ask your mom really important things about your life, or search for that same type of guidance that they were able to give you in the past, but that just might not be possible right now. So while it's hard for a caregiver, it makes it a little easier on the person that has the dementia, so that they don't feel overwhelmed or have feelings of opposition to complicated questions or things you might be asking them. Avoid correcting and criticizing. That's for everybody, right? If you want to have a pleasant conversation. And again, focusing on the feelings is huge. So trying to take a pause, understand what's being, like, the message behind what's being said, not just the words that are being used. Yeah, so those are my basic do's and don'ts. But separately, I find two methods or strategies of communication to be really helpful. Now, this might not take place at the very beginning of dementia. I know when people were filling out the poll, this seemed a little bit earlier on than what I'm going to be talking about right now. But these two tools are, the first being validation, and then the second being therapeutic lying or fibbing. So, for example, if your, well, validation to start with is a way of accepting your loved one's reality and their feelings in a way that makes them feel understood. So, if your father who is suffering from dementia is calling out for his mom, who may have long since passed away, instead of trying to correct him and say, Dad, your mom passed away 25 years ago, which can be hurtful if he's not really there, right? Understanding that at that moment. Instead of saying something like that, but saying, "Oh, you must really miss your mom," and opening the conversation that way. Or, something like, what was your mom like? So that you're approaching a conversation in a way that can help your loved one work through the root of their feelings and emotions and what they're talking about or experiencing without correcting. So that's validation. And then therapeutic lying or fibbing, this can be a little controversial. It works for some people, not for others. But it's really the concept is having the goal of preventing or curtailing more extreme distress, agitation, or harmful behavior in your loved one without sacrificing their dignity. So basically, in this strategy, you go along with or you agree with it with whatever your loved one is thinking or seeing in the case of delusions at that point in time to help them resolve immediate distress. And again, this can be hard for some caregivers to do with a loved one, but it really can help de-escalate a situation when necessary.
Great, thank you. Perry, I wish I had had the benefit of your tips when I was caring for my mother with dementia. I certainly did some of the don'ts that you gave and was guilty of, when my mother was in her early stages of memory loss, correcting her if she would um, ask the same thing again and again and again. I would say, no, Mom, remember, which is a singularly unhelpful thing to say to someone with memory loss. So thank you for those tips. Another thing that I struggled with as a caregiver was that things kept changing. I would think that we were sort of in a steady state with Mom. I was feeling good about how we were communicating what she was thinking and going through, and then all of a sudden things would change, maybe with increased confusion, agitation, frustration. And I know this is something that the both of you help families deal with. So Jen, any tips on how to sort of anticipate and deal with those changes?
Yes, and especially since we have so many folks who are either, in the, sort of education phase and early phase, this is a great thing to start early on. And it's really just a journal that helps you keep track of those triggers and to see if there's any patterns. Sometimes the pattern will last a day, an hour, or maybe it'll last a month. But having a dialogue to go back and reflect on is really helpful. There are going to be things that remain for a very long time and things that are, changing on a daily basis. But keeping a journal and tracking those patterns is beneficial to not only you, but also any other care partners that you have on your team, and then also for your loved ones' medical professionals too. So talking with the doctors about that is really going to be concrete and essential to the care plan that they're putting together and the work that they're doing to help your loved one. Some of the things that you might want to keep track in the journal are things like eating and sleeping habits. Are they, flip-flopping their days and nights? Are they moving food around on their plate? Are they overeating and, eating, lunch 3 times because they don't remember having had it the first or the second time? Things like that. Behaviors that might come up could be, outbursts, anger, hallucinations, anxiety, maybe there's a time of the day they're relaxed. So keeping track of the times that they're having these types of behaviors and how long they last is going to be really insightful to kind of see what's happening before those or what's happening afterwards. How are those impacted by others? All those kinds of things are really going to be insightful. Safety concerns are another great thing to keep track of as the disease progresses. Maybe driving is of a concern. Wandering is another major safety concern if they are getting lost, leaving the home, not sure how to get back. And then also misuse of like household items, whether it's using, the washing machine or vacuum or toaster, things like that, but also, leaving the water running or the stove on. Some of those very important safety concerns are, easy sometimes to just chuck up to, oh, they're just, got distracted, but those are all important things to really keep track of and kind of have a timeline for. And the last one I would include in that journal would be things like medications. And when you're talking about medications, that could mean, how effective are they? What kind of side effects might you be seeing as a result of the medications? As well as refusal to take the medications or over medicating. Things again like that can happen with memory, either not remembering to take them or thinking they didn't take them and they actually had. So I think in general, keeping track of any type of patterns is going to be helpful to see what you do going forward and how you can best impact their day-to-day living.
Got it. So I'm going to pivot a little bit and sort of look at this truly from the perspective of the caregiver and how they are doing. Caring for someone with memory loss can be at times really overwhelming, stressful, emotionally, physically, intellectually, and that's true whether you're brand new to caregiving or maybe are a long time caregiver for someone with dementia. So I'd love to hear about ways that caregivers can be prepared in advance for these inevitable challenges. Perry, any thoughts on that?
Sure, yeah. Well, when it comes to being prepared in advance, I think it's a great idea to have a list. I'm actually a big fan of lists in general, but lists of activities and conversations that work, right? So again, this is going to come in handy if somebody needs to take over for you for the day or a week or something like that, but also just for you to have as your go-to. So try to keep a list of updated things like their current interests, that might have to do with the time frame that they find themselves in or your loved one finds themselves in. For example, I know with my grandma, she loved dancing. So without a doubt, we could put on Dancing with the Stars and we would both be engaged and have something to talk about, and it would be a joyful experience. Knowing about some calming activities is great to have too. So if your loved one responds well to hand massages or art projects, um, general modified activities could be things, that they used to do in the past, looking through magazines of things that they were interested in. And also one of my favorites, which is reminiscing on either photos or stories. Just starting off with a prompt to ask your loved one something like, when was the last time you saw the beach, can open up a conversation where they can share something with you and you can share something with them. And there's not really a timestamp on that. It's just expressing feelings or things that you saw or did, and usually in a very positive light. Another thing you can do as a caregiver, past just having that kind of list of things that, for the most part, are good to use in pretty much any situation, is educating and preparing yourself. So when you took that poll and there are so many people here just curious or at the beginning stages, this makes me very happy, because educating and preparing yourself is a much better way to start off if you're going to have to head down this path. Um, It's good to, have an idea of the milestones of the disease. In general, the Alzheimer's Association, even though it just says Alzheimer's, it does a lot with Alzheimer's and dementia. They have a wonderful website. It's filled with articles. They have a whole section related to caregiver support or caregiving needs. So it has articles about the stages of Alzheimer's and dementia, behaviors, tips and tricks. It's a great place to start, and it covers a wide variety of topics. So whatever you're kind of going through at that moment, hopefully there's something relating to that as well. And then so big is making your circle of care. So that is creating a circle of people, organizations, different things around you, such as support groups, local, faith-based communities, family and friends, home care providers, physicians, everybody that you can surround yourself that's either going to be willing to help you, have information to help you, support you, lend you a hand when you need it. It's really, really important to make sure that you take the time to find out who those people and organizations are, because this is not something you want to do alone. This is something that as a caregiver, you deserve to have this support in place. So trying to have that ready to go. So when you are having a bad day or your loved one is having a bad day, you need to go out of town, you just need help, that those things are already set up. And then one more that would be really great with the holidays coming up is preparing your family and friends. So you might in conversation mention that your loved one has had a recent diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's. A lot of people don't really know what to expect with that. So if it's going to be the holidays or, something like that, and you're expecting people to come over and be with your loved one, it's really nice to prepare them first and say, you know, Grandma's been having memory issues. She hasn't really kept out the house the same it used to be. She looks a little different. Just trying to set those out beforehand. She might ask you the same question a couple times. Really allows for a successful interaction. Everybody is going to be happier. Your loved one with dementia is going to be happier. The family and friends that are visiting aren't going to show a negative reaction to your loved one. So really preparing family and friends is huge. And yes, and lastly, journaling. So this goes to Jen was saying earlier about keeping a list of things that you notice between what your loved one is going through, right? Making notes and following trends. This is a different type of journaling. This is journaling for you as a person and as a caregiver, just making notes of your own feelings, how you're coping, good moments throughout the day, or we call them sometimes moments of joy. And I just find it super helpful practice for really anybody, but especially for a family caregiver.
Those are awesome tips. And I will just say, I love your notion about preparing friends and family. I think many people, probably the majority of people they don't know about, they don't really understand dementia and are really uncomfortable around people with dementia. They just don't know what to expect. So if you can just give them a little bit of a heads up, they want to help, they want to engage, they love your loved one, are interested in spending time with them. You just got to give them that little bit of guidance, and then it just totally brings the stress down. So that's just was my personal experience. And Perry, I'm intrigued by your notion of modified hobbies, and sort of thinking in advance about that, or maybe Jen too. Do you guys have any examples of how somebody might do that?
I do actually have one that stands out so vividly in my days in working in a memory care community. We had a gentleman who was really into cars, not only as a hobby, but also as a profession. He worked on cars, he sold cars, he collected cars. Like they had so much to share in terms of what he did from a hobby standpoint as well. But as he was aging, he obviously was not able to get under the hood of a car any longer, and he wasn't selling cars anymore. But we were able to pull together a simple like lookbook for him, so to speak. So we actually took like a calendar, and it was a 12 by 12 calendar. So it had great vivid photos of all kinds of different things related to cars. And we just dropped them into a scrapbook, and we're able to sit down with him and have really interesting conversations about the different types of cars. He could also look at it himself too. It wasn't necessarily something that had to be done with somebody, but when it was awesome conversation, and it was really cool to see him light up. Like, I remember working on this car, or I sold a car like this, and I got, blah, blah, blah. So it was really cool conversation, a great way to engage with him, in a way that was meaningful and purposeful, but didn't necessarily, exactly replicate how he, it was involved with cars at a younger age.
Awesome. Thank you. So before I pepper Jen and Perry with a few more questions, I'm gonna poll everybody, all you caregivers out there, ask you one more question. We said at the beginning, dementia is a huge topic, and we are planning future webinars on additional dementia topics. We'd love to hear topics that are of interest to you, things that we might cover. So I'm going to launch another poll. Choose as many of these options as are interesting to you. We would love to, again, love to take those ideas into account when we're doing additional webinars. And wow, I'm seeing pretty much everything is of interest. If there's anything that is, here, I'm gonna share all the results with you. If there's a topic that you can think of that isn't listed here, feel free to mention it on a survey that's going to pop up at the end of the webinar. So just write it in, and we would absolutely love to hear that. Okay, so I'm going to take it back to Jen and Perry. If you could sort of share 3 overarching tips or things to think about, to take away from today for caregivers, what might those be?
I will say, thinking back on several things that Perry covered, the one thing that stands out is really building that support circle. That encompasses so many things, in a variety of different ways, but ultimately you do not want to be on this journey alone. So finding out, who those resources are, who those individuals are, what those tips and tricks are, what those, it's so many different things, but building that support circle, I think, is critical to the well-being of both you as the caregiver and the one that you're caring for with dementia.
Awesome. I'm going to go with, I'm going to take the second one. And I think I'm also going to pull on Jen for this one. I think it's very important what this whole conversation started with, and that is being able to separate as much as you can your loved one from the disease. And that goes to that kind of dementia brain term that Jen was using, but really knowing, like just feeling and knowing and separating is so very important, because without that, caring for a loved one with dementia is very hard to start off with, but without being able to separate those two things, it can really take a toll on you emotionally, for sure. So yes, I'm going to say dementia brain, separating. That's my second one for ending, for the last tip.
Yeah, and I would just chime in that the moments of joys, finding those is critical too. I think it just allows you to be in this role in a way that is also uplifting. And those moments of joys could be like a 30-second, smile on their face that you see through to, the joys and, happy memories of maybe years ago, but also just, an activity where you're sitting with them for 30 minutes and enjoying that. So really calling out those moments of joy, I think, can propel you, through the day, through the week. So really taking time to identify those and celebrate those for sure.
Awesome, thank you. And hey, we just got a comment that this whole concept of dementia brain is reminiscent of the training I give in conflict resolution. Separate the person from the problem. So absolutely, I think yeah, it applies in many situations. So thank you so much for that thought. Yeah, yeah. Well, we did get a couple of other questions, but we're at our time. And so we'll be following up with people separately on those questions. And for now, I just want to give you a little heads up that we're going to be doing a webinar on December 1st on finding joy during and after the holidays. So we talk a lot about the stress associated with caregiving, and the holidays absolutely provide some opportunities to focus on the joy of caregiving as well. So the link to register for that is going to be in an email you'll get post webinar, and we also always are on LinkedIn. And thank you, Tammy, for your comment. Great information, many takeaways. I'm so glad you found it helpful. And yeah, so we look forward to doing some more webinars on dementia related topics. Thank you all so much for joining us, and we wish you the very best in your caregiving. Have a great day.